Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to the Westcliffe Climb. I am here, Pastor Joshua Duffy. Of course, I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Paul Looney. How are you today, brother?
Doing good. It's a chilly day. It's wet, and it's a good day to be inside, warm and toasty, and being with my good friend, the host of the Westcliffe Climb, Josh
There,
Duffy.
there it is. And of course, speaking of warm and toasty in the month of February, all you lovers out there and lonely people alike, we're going to talk about, well, sex and dating. Let's back that up. We really should talk it in its right order. Dating, marriage, and sex. And just to bring it full circle, Jesus at the center of it all, which was the song, of course, Macias Niwe in his debut with Westcliffe, who did just a phenomenal job. So we're going to dive into the deep end of the pool. Of course, February is always an interesting time to reflect on dating, relationships, and the like. You've had some very interesting insights, wonderful insights in the topic of sex. Why don't you lay some of that on us here and now this morning?
Well, Josh, let me just start by saying that I was not a fan of God's idea of making men and women because very early in my life, I looked around and realized what mischief was made by the battle of the sexes, even in elementary school, when the girls had cooties. I realized that for whatever reason, God chose to create a dynamic between men and women, which to me was very problematic for a number of reasons. And as I grew up a little bit more and came to be aware more of sexuality and the desire for um, to connect, that urge to merge, as we might call it, um, I was like, God, why did you do this? Like, I could even imagine God, you know, casting the idea of sex out to Jesus, in the beginning of creation, and Jesus going like, Dad, that's really weird. um, but the thing that I try to communicate in the video is that sex is God's idea, and whether we find it convenient or not, or comfortable or not, He asks us to grapple with our sexuality in a way that honors His design for
Hmm.
us. And the sort of the fundamental point that I try to make is the point I believe the Apostle Paul anchors his teaching about sexuality in 1 Corinthians 6 and 7. The point that we are made by God and for God, that the body is not made for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. That there's this deep truth, this profound and awe-inspiring, like almost unbelievable truth, that God made us for Himself, and that He is a jealous God and gets to have His say and His sway when it comes to what I do with my body.
Wow, so good. So good. And I think you're touching on something that was really interesting here. It's like the idea of honoring God's intent, his will, and his design. You say design versus honoring our desire. That's what I wrote down as you're talking. Like there's the
Mm,
conflict. The difference
yeah.
in honoring his design versus honoring our desire, which is
Ooh.
inevitably in fact quite rarely in line naturally
Yeah.
with his
Yeah.
design. So if you were to expand on that idea of the here's the competition of design and desire, speak to that if you don't mind.
Well, yeah. Powerful desire is a good thing, um, but it's troublesome. The more profound a desire a child has to get what he or she wants, as a toddler, for instance, it's actually a sign of great strength that a child has this strong desire to get what they want at any particular time, and desire by itself is what moves us into experiences and activities that will help us achieve our goals and succeed in life, to accomplish what will ultimately bless us. So desire is a really good thing. However, every 2-year-old also has to learn, in addition to strong desire, is the ability to exercise restraint over
Mm,
those desires. And that it turns out that the design that we have to be made in the image of God is precisely facilitated by that intersection between strong desire and powerful restraint. And we see it in the dating relationship. You talk about dating, and that everyone who goes on a date wishes for the other person to desire them strongly, but also needs for that person to exercise restraint until the two are both at the place for that first kiss, that
right.
first holding of hands, or there has to be that willingness to say, I really want you, and I'm willing to wait on you wanting me.
Wow. That's great. That's great. And to help people understand, I think more and more, like he's actually God's design is actually to protect our hearts. Like it's not about him being a killjoy. And I have to tell you, maybe I'm going too far off in the deep end here of what I'm revealing, but just in my own ministry, I started out what I've realized and noticed is the number of couples when I'm doing premarital counseling that are already living together, sleeping together. It's just like that's the new norm. If
Mhm.
someone's out there listening and troubled by that, I don't know what to tell you because it's literally what is probably walking into my office, your office. It's just taken over culture.
Yeah.
And when I initially dealt with this issue, I have several people throughout Houston who hate my guts because when I started this, I would just go, this is what he wants for you. Here's his design. And so you can get in line with that yesterday, or I'm sorry, I won't do your wedding. You can imagine the reciprocated love and joy that I've received from those types of statements. How dare you,
Sure. Yeah.
you hateful human being. So what I began to notice, and I'm not saying I've nailed it here, it's just I'm in process. What I have noticed is when I first invested in their relationship in the counseling process, premarital counseling process, and get to know them and their hopes and their dreams and their desire in their marriage, and then they go see a counselor like yourself and actually dig in maybe into the actual wiring and family and all of this stuff that makes me, and then they come back and see me. I have found that the message now of what God desires for you to do from this point on, moving into your marriage before you're married and honoring his design and his intent, I have found that's way more well received. Why? I think because his design is rooted in relationship, and now trying to go about coaching people and guiding people in a way that's rooted in relationship versus taking that same thing and making it about rules. And we often just think God's just all about the rule. And he's just trying to slam us. You know what I mean?
Sure. Well, what you're saying is perfectly in line with another sentiment that is expressed by Paul in that same passage of scripture, where Paul says, all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. All things are lawful, but I will not be mastered by any of them. So he's saying whenever you're dealing with a force as powerfully good and strong as sexuality, it's good that you not make it about rules, because sexuality actually is a urge to bust through boundaries, to overcome the usual boundaries between two people, and to blend your souls and your bodies in a powerfully exciting and thrilling way. But Paul says if you just appeal to law, you're doomed, because the forces of nature will not yield to law. But if love is the deeper grounding of those uh, boundaries, then we have a better chance of doing the right thing for a desire that is even more powerful and deep than the erotic love that
Right.
we feel in romance. That the agape love that we have for God and one another could, if we think deeply enough about it, realize that this person that I love deserves to know that my sexuality, as powerfully as it is directed toward them at this moment, and as much as we both want to jump into bed together, that the call of God on my sexuality is deeper, stronger, and sturdier than my own desire for you if you're the object of my affection. Why
Right.
is that? Well, what we know is that as powerful as that drive is to cement the bond of love in a physical way, that drive will wax and wane over the course of a relationship. And every married couple wants to know that in those moments when it wanes, when it's at a low, when I really don't want to sleep with my partner because I'm frustrated with them, they worked my last nerve, I'm upset with them, that even when my desire for them is at a low, I will not give myself permission to step out of the bounds
Right.
because they've seen from the very beginning that the number one commitment that I have is not to them, but to God as God in my
Right.
life, and it's the fundamental question of, do you believe that there is a God, and if so, do you believe that being God gives you permission, gives you the authority to say uh, what is so, to have the final word. And and of course, your conviction and mine is that yes, if you believe in God, by definition, that belief, if there's a trust also along with belief, that that includes a surrender to
Yeah.
God as the final word.
Love it. Well, then let me ask you this. You think it's one or the other or the same? When there is a lack of restraint, does this disproportionately damage, like place a weight, a burden, and do more damage to the heart, the soul, the mind of women or men? Or would you say in your experiences both and when restraint and desire aren't working in perfect harmony and inevitably desire wins out over a sense of restraint in a relationship? Do you think that both are kind of equal, or do you feel like women are more walk away with more of a deeper pain from that experience, or is it men who walk away
It's a
with a deeper?
That's a great question, and I would have to say that because I feel like women are more driven from the soul, it's it, that the physical connection of sexuality affects them not just in their bodies but in their souls in a very deep way, and that's why I think that in centuries past, for a lot of reasons, women actually were held to a higher standard and were in a way the gatekeepers for maintaining purity in a relationship. um, Part of that actually serves a good function for them because it allows the one that they love to pursue them and to press them for intimacy, which most women want. That even if they're not interested in sex, they like being pursued for
Mhm.
sex. They like to know that they're attractive. Um, but now, unfortunately, in my view, um, we've lost that sense that a woman should maintain her sense of um, what's the word? Her sense of restraint and powerful desire to be pure. And
Yeah.
so you have a lot of relationships now where the woman becomes the pursuer, even in terms of physical intimacy, which most men think that they would want. But when I work with couples where the woman's drive for intimacy sexually is higher than the man's, it almost always creates uh, a dynamic that neither of them really end up enjoying. There's something about that masculine energy of wanting to pursue that
Yeah.
actually is enhanced by a woman holding back some, with being needing to be won over or
Yeah.
wooed, as it were. So yeah, I think that the answer to your question, if I circle back around, is that I do think that in general women suffer more partly because when a man has access to physical intimacy, his big drive to seal the relationship with a commitment of marriage um, typically goes down because that access to the belonging of a woman as a partner for physical intimacy is one of the big drivers for marriage for men. Whereas for women, it tends to be a little lower down on those uh, motives for marriage.
Wow. Well, I was watching something not too long ago about the commodity of sex, almost like looking at sex as like a product, if you will.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the whole point of what was fascinating, the way that they looked at it from that, like the economy, that's what it was, like the economy of sex. And their whole
yeah, yeah,
point is speaking to the dynamics of what you're talking about, which is essentially that women were in a very good spot with this topic and with this particular, if you think of it for a second as like a product, because
yeah,
they were in essence the gatekeepers. And
yeah,
so the men had a certain mindset, and what they're talking about is now the flip is all of the dating apps, all of the ways in which men and women alike can just swipe left or swipe right to get whatever they want. Men now all the more are no longer, they don't have to hold out to get what they want. It's
right,
easier for them to get what they want when they want. And if you're going to put up any you're going to push back and you're not going to give away certain things with your body, they'll just move on.
yeah,
It's been become cheapened. And then the flip side of that is, in the per your point, the messaging then to women and to young ladies and to girls is see that which is giving something away as a positive, as empowering. And
yeah,
then in effect, what they're talking about is between men's, attitude and mentality. Combine that now with the social structure, the messaging and culture. Now you throw in the messaging to young ladies and women alike. And we've taken this thing together now and cheapened it to such a point that it's literally losing its value back from what
yeah.
was God's design.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And the whole debate about homosexual, heterosexual, really it comes back to holiness. It comes back to whether or not we believe that we are made for God and
Mm,
that his design for us is that we experience a longing for something that we cannot fully apprehend. One of the other unfortunate things that we see in a society where sexuality becomes more accessible early in life is that uh, the ability to turn that sexual energy toward other pursuits like academics or athletics or art. It's a process we term sublimation in psychological terms. That sexual energy, if it's not discharged through actual sexual intercourse with another person, that energy is part of what drives poetry and music and um, dance and athletics and academics. And so that's why it's another sad thing when a
mm.
culture lowers the bar on just direct access to sexuality because that energy is dissipated and no longer quite as available to spur on other pursuits.
Fascinating. I've never heard that. That's fascinating. Well, then, and also I want our listeners to realize, when you keep saying design, and you've referenced it no less than half a dozen times, this is why, like, the story and the narrative of creation is so important. It's why the first chapter of John is so important. There is a will and a desire and a design that's first put in place. And it's so weird. That's really where the argument is. So if you're followers of Jesus listening to this, you want to know why there's so much invested in undermining Genesis and this whole story of that narrative. That's why. Because basically, it's kinda like, "Here, God's design is this beautiful car. Here's how I intended it to run." And then mankind took it and ran it into a tree, and there's no bumper on it anymore, and went, "Here, this is good enough." And we're the ones walking around going, "No, actually, this was his intent. I think the desire is, let's go find the bumper. It's never gonna fit quite the same, okay? But maybe we should try to make it look kind of sort of how he first designed it. Let's just do the best that we can. It might fall
Yeah,
off from time to time, may need some extra, duct tape, but I want people to realize when you keep talking about design, that's such an important and key word and phrase.
yeah. So one of the things that I think gets people hung up is that when you approach sexuality from a "thou shalt not" mentality,
Hmm,
um, then it tends to put God as a the author of some kind of rigid
right.
withholding structure.
Yeah.
And but what we actually see in Scripture is that God is a God who gives us clear and firm boundaries, knowing that we will test them and we will sometimes step outside of them. Some of us will have to learn the hard way, but
Right.
he's okay with that. I'm not saying he gives us a pass to say no to him about things, but some of us are going to have to learn things the hard way. Hopefully, we can learn from other people's mistakes. I've never really gotten into taking drugs, for instance, because I've worked with enough people who have and seen my brothers go down
Right.
that path that I
Right.
didn't have to learn the hard way that drugs are not ultimately going to bless my brain. Um, but there are other lessons I've had to learn uh, the hard way without question and sometimes repeatedly. But the good news about God is that if you have stepped outside the boundaries sexually, and many people, as you said, that we work with who are in especially in generations below mine, the vast majority have stepped outside the boundaries. It doesn't mean that God is going to smite you and cast you aside because you have been unfaithful to Him. The Scripture says He's faithful even when we're faithless,
Mm,
but He deeply desires for us when we come into an enlightened place to get back on the path to honor Him. And
yeah.
even couples who have been living together, I encourage them if they're going to build a life together as a couple in a marriage to take a time before they get married of abstinence so that they
Yeah.
demonstrate to each other and to themselves that they can honor God even in the height of passion. Because again, that gives them that sense that later on in marriage, when they feel some heightened passion towards someone other than their mate, they've had experience of saying, "No, I'm going to honor God in this moment, even though every cell in my body is experiencing that urge to merge."
Urge to merge. What a phrase. What a phrase. That's so much more eloquent than what I say, which is like, listen, uh, a few decades are going to go by. You're going to be old and ugly and no longer attractive. You need Jesus in the middle of it to stay together. But I like what you say a lot better. That's way better. That was way more eloquent. That was beautiful. Urge to merge. Is that going to be a t-shirt? Is that going to be a Westcliffe t-shirt? You are solid gold, sir. Okay, so it kind of just tied into where I was going was with dating, and it's just, golly, I just feel. And granted, the youngest person in my crew of my siblings is female, my sister, and man, through her, I just did not know how much the dating game has changed, and
Mm,
I
mm,
feel, especially for young ladies trying to navigate this and do it right for the very reasons that we talked about. And I know there's so many people, especially if you're out there listening, that are struggling through being single and trying to honor God in that because it's just really such a mess of trying to navigate this in a way that honors your own body. And I've been amazed at the number of people through her that she would express that everything that they put out there, they're a follower of Jesus, they love Jesus, they go to church, they love being a part of this. And then when it gets to the topic of sex, they find out, or she would find out, it's a deal breaker. Like literally, like no, I can't continue to see you. So it's like this is so pervasive, and that whole idea, I see such an interesting parallel. It's like the children of Israel at one point, they have this broken thing behind them in their life of making bricks for Pharaoh, but they have this unknown, immovable object in front of them and called the Red Sea. and they're supposed to just trust that somehow what's in front of them is going to be better than what's behind them. And I can't blame them, because their whole thing to Moses is, hey, at least I'd rather have something broken and kind of lousy, but I know what it is. I'll take that over the unknown thing that you're going to do, supposedly, that I can't see, I can't fathom, I can't understand. And so to me, I feel like I really feel for the people that are in that dating world right now, because they are dealing with their own deeply spiritual, like rubber hits the road trust, really trusting that God is going to part the waters and is going to take them somewhere. And what's waiting for them is something beautiful and better and superior versus this broken thing that's behind them. I mean, I'd love to ask couples, I'd love to ask young ladies, listen, would you be with this dude if I could show you a picture right now of what's waiting for you? It's right on the other side of that. It's right on the other side. It's 4 years from now, so your phone's not gonna ring for 3 and a half of the 4 years. Would you be would you be making bricks with this person? Or
It's really, yeah, it's a lovely question to pose to people. I think the hard thing is that we we live in a world where we cannot necessarily guarantee that God has that partner for everyone who longs for that partner.
yeah,
Because you and I both know people who, either because God called them to the single life, or because they were, for some reason, either because physical characteristics or social status or income, were disqualified as a prime runner in that dating game.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And that's where we have to, once again, we want to contextualize this whole idea of marriage and sexuality and dating with Jesus at the center, where he declares us as his bride, that we will all participate in that wedding feast and what follows. And so what I try to remind myself, and what I try to remind people that I talk with, that yes, I want you to have a partner on this planet who is a beautiful reflection of that marriage between Christ and the church, because the apostle Paul suggests in the book of Ephesians that when we talk about marriage, we're actually talking about the picture of Christ and the church, that
mm,
it's a foreshadowing of that. And so what we want people to realize is that yes, marriage can be a profoundly good thing, but if it is not anchored in godly relationship, marriage can be a taste of hell. It can be heaven or hell.
yeah,
And so, far better, in my mind, to commit your soul to a loving God and trust him that if I have to walk this path as a single person,
yeah,
that he will make it up to me. And that I can believe him that the deprivation that I feel on those long, lonely nights will be rewarded,
yeah.
if
Wow.
commit to him. But for most people who desire marriage, it's out there, but not for all.
Well, I love what you're saying, though. I guess to put it plainly is like there is something worse than being alone, and that is being married and alone.
Yeah, yeah.
That would
There's
be a
nothing
terrible.
lonely. Yeah, it's lonely to be in a bed by yourself, but it may be lonelier to be at one side of a bed with someone at the other side with whom you feel completely disconnected.
Hmm. Wow, great, great, great insight. Wow. Well, that went by fast, didn't it? That just flew by. We're already done like that. Boom.
Time flies when you're having fun.
So we love you guys out there. Of course, Church of the King with Mr. Tavarius Lenzer, continued support of Tavarius's support. Macias Niwe, looking forward to having Macias on real soon. He's got a very cool story. He has a very cool ministry. He's just very cool. So we're going to have him on here with us very, very soon. Again, go check out his song, Jesus at the Center of It All. We worked it into this topic today. Beautiful. Anything going on with Hidden Manna at all that you want to share? Anything happening there?
Just still, we had to delay our trip to the prison to next week because of the weather, but we've got a bunch of books and clothing that we're donating through Hidden Manna. Thanks to all of you who have been a part of that. clothing and book drive. And we're just continuing to minister to pastors and couples in need, and appreciate your support.
Love it. Love it. Of course, Woodlands Church, thank you for your continued support as well. Pilgrim Lutheran Church here in Houston, of which I am the senior pastor. A great honor and privilege, having a great time doing that. We love you guys as well. Dr. Paul, would you mind closing us out in a word of prayer?
Love to. God, thank you for my brother Josh. Thank you for his desire to shepherd your sheep in a way that honors you. Thank you for his heart for a passion and a purity that forge that deep connection with you and with others. God, thank you for his leadership and for his longing to let his light shine, that others can see his good work and give glory to you. God, make us like that. Make us um, those image bearers that when it comes to our bodies, especially our sexuality, we glorify you with our bodies because we are created in your image for your pleasure. And God, we know that you are fully prepared to shepherd a soul that is surrendered to you and to give us what we need. So we look to you for that today and in the days to come, day by day, listening for your voice, ready to follow. We ask for your deep and abiding blessing in the name of your precious Son, Jesus, our good shepherd. Amen.
Amen. We love you guys, and we will see you here next week. Bye.